Hello and hi everyone. Welcome to this 24th Urban AI conversation. My name is Hubert and I'm the founder of Urban AI. So what is Urban AI? It's a global organization dedicated to the emerging field of urban artificial intelligence. We are leading a think tank doing research and experiment in this field. We also federate a community of now more than 150 global experts from all around the world. And we also have a consulting branch to help urban stakeholders navigate the ongoing AI revolution. And as part of our activities, we are very regularly organizing urban AI conversation during which public servants, international expert researchers can present and discuss their latest publication, projects, or research. And for this 24th Urban AI conversation, we have the great pleasure and honor of welcoming Leila, DotyPrivacy, an AI analyst at the city of San Jose, and Eleonor, BoundsSenior analyst in data privacy and responsible AI at the city of Seattle. Hi, Leila. Hi, Eleonor.
Hi, Hubert. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank
Great.
you.
Great to have you. And so the topic of this Urban AI conversation is actually Urban AI on the environment, referring to current blog series you are co-authoring, you are writing on this topic of AI and the environment for the GovAI and with the GovAI Coalition. So first, we will have like 15-minute presentation from Leila and Eleonor to better understand this topic of AI and the environment and what is the AI environmental footprint and what local governments can do about it. Then we'll have like 15-20 minute chats. And lastly, we'll open the stage for participants in the room joining for like a 5-10 minute Q&A session. Leila and Eleonor, the floor is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I know that Eleanor and I are very happy to be here with you all today. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Let me know if you can see my screen. I
Yep.
think it should be working. Okay, and it should be presenting now. And so today we'll be talking with you all about the role of local governments as it relates to the environmental impacts of AI. And like Hubert shared, we'll be sharing about a blog series that we recently started to publish on this topic. And so just to start off with really quick introductions, I'm Leila Doty. I'm a privacy and AI analyst at the city of San Jose. For those who might not be familiar, San Jose is in California. It's in the Bay Area, and it's just south of San Francisco. Eleanor, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name's Eleanor Bounds. I work for the city of Seattle. I work in privacy responsible AI and some of the surveillance ordinance work that we do. Seattle is, to Leila's point about the geography, I forget sometimes, it's located in the state of Washington, not to be confused with Washington, D.C., which often happens. So yeah, and I know we're missing Lindsay. So I'll let you introduce Lindsay, who is not here, but we wish she were.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we wanted to give a quick shout out to our third co-author, Lindsay Washburn with AI Governance Group. She couldn't make it here today, but she's here in spirit, and she's been just, integral to this whole project that we've embarked on. And the three of us are in local government. We met through this organization called the GovAI Coalition, which I'll share about on the next slide. But we're all really passionate about ensuring that AI is used responsibly in the public sector. So just for really quickly, just a little bit of context. For those who are not familiar, the GovAI Coalition is a collective of government agencies, mostly based in the United States, but we have a small but growing international presence. Some of our colleagues actually in the coalition, I think, did a panel with Urban AI last year. But we were founded in November of 2023 by the city of San Jose and a couple of other agencies. And the coalition has really worked to develop AI governance policy templates and resources that can help agencies kickstart doing AI policy, doing AI governance, and ensuring that when they use AI in the public sector, that it's done so in a responsible way that's compliant with standards and regulations. And so the scope of the coalition has grown over time, But the main motivation for all of us coming together from different agencies was to really promote more accountability from vendors, from the companies that sell AI to governments. And our mission is to promote more responsible AI in the public sector. And the coalition has really become, I think, a community of practice for government practitioners. And it kind of incubated this project for Eleanor, Lindsay, and I. The coalition right now, it's grown to over 700 agencies across all levels of government. So we've got cities, counties, state agencies, federal agencies. And if you are on the call and you work for a government agency, or you're a member of academia or civil society, or if you work at a company that cares about responsible AI, we welcome you to join the coalition. I'll put a link in the chat later if you want to sign up. But that's just a little bit of context about how the three of us met and how this work began. Getting back to the topic of the hour, I think that many of you are probably tuning in because you may have seen headlines like these on the screen, and you might be concerned about some of the environmental impacts that AI is having. And over the past couple of years, but I think more so in the last 1 to 2 years, more recently, there have been many news headlines, academic studies about how AI is straining energy grids, how the coal industry is being reinvigorated to power AI data centers, how people are having to suffer shortages of drinking water while potable water is used to cool those data centers, right? And so if learning about those things concerns you, if it makes you wonder what can be done about it, Eleanor, Lindsay, and I, we feel the same way. We're in the same boat. And as data centers and AI usage continues to proliferate in the world that we live in, this problem is only going to grow if we don't act now to address it and to prevent and mitigate these harms. And one thing that I want to add that I think is important to me about these headlines is that this issue, and I think climate change, climate issues more broadly, they're often framed as global issues, right? And I think in many ways that is true. They are global issues, but the impacts are felt at the local level. So this is a quote from one of our blog posts, that AI data centers create impacts at the local level, right? They're felt by communities. These data centers have the potential to strain municipal energy grids. They consume massive amounts of water from local sources. And the public health impacts of data centers, like air degradation, noise pollution, those impacts are inflicted directly on local communities, right? And so, given that framing of this as a local issue, from our vantage points in local government, the three of us wondered, what role can local governments play in tackling this issue? What policy interventions, what tools are at the disposal of cities, counties, state agencies, and municipalities to address this issue? And then I think, maybe more importantly, what role should local government play? And there are a lot of different opinions on the answer to that last question, to no one's surprise. So to start thinking about these questions and posing them to our peers, we started a humble blog series on the GovAI Coalition Substack account. And our audience was primarily fellow practitioners in local government. We published a couple pieces, with 3 of our main pieces focusing on the energy, water, and public health impacts of AI. And in each article, we write through a local lens, and we made sure to include a specific section that focused on the policy actions that local governments could take to respond to these issues. And I do want to say, this might be a good time to mention that, Eleanor, Lindsay, and I, we are not academic experts on this topic. We're not going to be able to provide the perspective of an expert on, energy grids or whatnot. But what we do have to contribute to the conversation is our perspective working in local government and how that intersects with the environmental impacts of AI. And so just really quickly, we had a few goals for this project. The first goal was to raise awareness. I think at this point in time, many people are still unaware of the environmental impacts of AI, especially when we start to get into the scale and the severity of what's going on right now. And so at this stage, education and awareness is really crucial. Secondly, we also wanted to spark thoughtful conversation amongst our peers. Like I said, we aren't the academic or industry experts, but the least that we feel we can do is to help start posing these questions in our community getting more people to engage in a constructive dialogue with each other about paths forward at the local level. And then finally, we wanted to call our peers to action in local government. In participating in the GovAI Coalition, we've met many other people who are concerned about this issue, but they don't know what they could do about it, if anything, especially on the smaller community scale. And so our focus in these blogs is to elucidate some actions that local governments can take to make a difference. And all in all, we see the benefits that AI has to offer. We know that data centers are critical to the digital world that we live in. But at the rate that things are going, it's just not sustainable. And so we need to work together to intervene, to set up structures that protect against these harms, and so that the benefits can clearly outweigh the costs. And so with that, I just want to really briefly share about some takeaways from the energy piece, and I'll pass it to Eleonor, who's going to speak about the water and public health impacts and overall takeaways from this project. But just to speak about energy briefly, the research community is uncovering new findings about this every day. I see new notifications on this every day on LinkedIn, which is great. But there are some statistics that we do know, some key things about AI's energy demands. And first is that AI, especially generative AI, uses a lot of energy. In particular, according to the International Energy Agency, one AI data center uses as much power as 100,000 households in the US. And there are many other statistics out there that really demonstrate the scale of what's going on here. Secondly, the amount of energy that's used by Gen AI, it varies depending on the type of content that you're generating. And studies have shown that image and video generation tend to be far more energy intensive than text generation, for example. And in addition, the energy demands are in part, they depend on two things. One is the training process that it takes to actually train that big model. And then second is inference, which means just using the AI system, using the model every time you query it. And what research has found actually, previously, many people assumed that training was the bulk of the energy usage, but it turns out that AI inference, actually querying the model, typically consumes more energy because it's continuous and occurs in high volume, right? There's millions of people using ChatGPT dozens of times every day. That really adds up. And so to meet those demands, new data centers are being built. And in terms of impact to local communities, when a new data center is built in the region, that spike in electricity demand, it's a big spike, that can drive up the cost of local utilities for everyday people. And so in the United States, there are dozens of states that offer tax breaks for these data centers as well, because they want to attract them into their city core. Many folks, everyday ratepayers, they feel that they're being made to subsidize these companies, often big tech companies, through their increased utility bills. And so through all of that, the grid is really struggling to keep up with the electricity demands, and everyday people are feeling like they're being made to bear the brunt of it. So what can local governments do about it? So we have a couple recommendations. First is that agencies should really be leveraging the public procurement process. This is a really powerful policy lever, public procurement, especially for local governments who have less regulatory power than their state or federal agency counterparts, right? Agencies have the ability to set requirements for vendors and refuse to purchase solutions that don't meet their standards, including sustainability standards. It's an important market mechanism that can incentivize AI companies to be more environmentally conscious. And so agencies can leverage that procurement process to demand more transparency from AI vendors about the environmental impacts that they're being sold. So a lot of agencies are purchasing, licenses to things like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, things like that. Agencies can ask those companies how much energy is used per query, how much water is consumed by the data centers that power their products. And those companies, they might not always know the answer and be able to provide it, but just asking that question, I think, signals to the industry that this is something that we care about. And so the coalition has a policy template, that's what you see on the screen, that can help you do this. It's called the AI fact sheet. it's like the nutrition label for AI. It like captures things like training data, performance metrics for an AI system. But the fact sheet is a great way for agencies to start collecting this information. Have the company fill it out during the procurement process. The second recommendation, I'll try to go quickly and then pass it to you, Eleanor. Second recommendation is to demand that same transparency from data center operators around their energy and water usage, right? And also make sure that there's efficiency standards in place that the data center has to comply with. Some municipalities, they already do this. They have regulations around this, whether it's at the local or state level, but this could look like requiring data center operators to agree to this before you approved the construction of that center. In Virginia, in the States, there was proposed legislation that would have required data center operators to meet renewable energy standards in order to be eligible for tax exemptions. And then finally, third, there are a lot of people still who are unaware of these impacts, like we mentioned earlier. And so there is a need to continue to focus on education for the workforce and the general public. Some agencies are also working to update their internal AI policies to instruct employees to consider the environmental impacts of their generative AI usage. And so just speaking from my own experience in the city of San Jose, we recently updated our generative AI guidelines, our policy in the city. We include a new section about how employees can reduce the environmental impacts of their ChatGPT use. And so those guidelines encourage employees to minimize the number of prompts that you use. Direct ChatGPT to generate shorter output, right? Like a shorter length of text. And then only use Gen AI when it makes sense. Like if you're doing a classic search, just use Google. It uses less energy. And also since we're seeing that most of the energy demand is a result of inference or the querying rather than the training, actually minimizing usage at the individual level, I think can really have a direct impact on reducing the electricity consumption. So with that, oh, sorry, I think my screen's going a little haywire. With that, I'm going to pass it to Eleanor to talk about water.
Thank you, Leila. And it's totally fine that I think energy tends to be the most measured and really the most obvious thing that people look at. So thank you for that. And you're totally welcome to take up all the time. This is this section or these articles were written by, this article was written by Lindsay, or this blog post was written by Lindsay. So I can't, like, I wish I could speak to in depth more, but Lindsay could definitely cover more. That being said, I think one of the biggest takeaways that we were able to see was that data centers will start consuming as much water as countries, right? I mean, that's huge. And we know that there are measures being introduced insofar as how water is cycled and mitigation strategies. So it's more about having the conversation about, the baseline and how it can be improved, right? But finding that by 2027, global AI demand is expected to account for 1.1 to 1 to 7 trillion gallons of water withdrawal, particularly with such a scarce resource. That's really extraordinary, right? So that was one of the biggest takeaways we took with that particular blog post. I would recommend to read that one in depth, and we can probably move on to the next slide, Leila. We know that water is a very tricky topic, and we're going to, I'm sure, see more conversation around it, and different, it's managed differently, right, in different places. Currently, I think most of it is still managed publicly in the US, but there are some moves to privatize that, and I'm sure that will also have impact. So one of the things that was determined that governments locally could do was to set standards for water usage, including limits for efficiency targets for these organizations. And then take a look, and when we met with experts on this topic, they referred us to this data setter water consumption calculator. And one of the big topics of conversation in using this kind of calculator was, well, it's not 100% accurate. It doesn't mean, that it's definite, that it's definitely, but the whole point was to have and spark conversation around what a data center would use in terms of water, right? And so the purpose was to kind of say to vendors, hey, like, these are the numbers we're showing. Can you give us maybe more information as to how you're approaching this, right? Because if we know that a data center taps into a huge amount of water, we're going to care. Our residents are going to care. They may not know exactly why, but they're going to feel it, right? So that was one of the reasons and the impetus to include this calculator and kind of have more conversation. And then also create incentives for sustainable practices, right? In the US, the big thing is tax breaks and also permitting. Things can take a long time to move through the system. So that was another takeaway from the water series. But the calculator is great. And I think really the motivation is about having conversation and encouraging that. We also know that public health, we can go to that if you want, Leila. Public health is another lesser known or lesser maybe, I think, explored area, but it is very intersectional. I think we'll see more of this. And, you know, it touches on air quality, right? And we know that the AI life cycle is complex, right? We have mining, we have chip manufacturing, we have data center operations, and all of these things, like, they can affect air quality, let alone other things, right? We know that there can be things like wastewater discharge. So, you know, if it's not regulated and it's not monitored, discharge could, you know, it could release harmful biocides, I believe, and contaminants into public water supply. And this may include things like corrosion inhibitors, heavy metals, you know, other dissolved solids. And I mean, the other part of this, really, I think that we're starting to see, or that we're starting to have more conversations about, is the increased load for water treatment. When we have rural communities that may not be able to treat this water or may struggle, this is something that we need to consider when we implement or build these data centers. This can also drive utility costs for folks in rural areas, more chemicals in the agricultural areas, because oftentimes these can be near one another. E-waste, you know, depletion of water tables. I mean, we kind of looked at high level numbers at the other slide. And I'm sure there's a lot of other unintended, you know, considerations or implications. I mean, things like noise pollution, whether that affects employees themselves, whether it affects local residents. We've seen a lot of people protesting the build of these because of the sounds and the noise pollution, or migratory patterns of birds, right? These are all things to think about, and it's such a connected web. So some things that we walked away with local governments being able to do is quantifying these public health impacts. Chalet, did I say his name right? I'm not. Chalet Wren met with us. That's right. Okay. And kind of helped us think about, okay, when we have the water calculator, it's looking at water. You know, it's a one-to-one thing. But he suggested that we use a public health calculator that's available at the EPA website, which kind of looks at more factors, right? It's if the location of a data center is in one place, the public health calculator will look at other effects like air quality and also maybe energy use. So it's a multifaceted approach. Another recommendation was to engage in information sharing for purposeful design. We know that city planners can sometimes be involved in, data center builds or even planning for co-locations or things like that where appropriate. And so that was one of the big takeaways, to kind of engage experts and vendors and not be afraid to have these conversations. Another very important takeaway was to prioritize community engagement where possible. So by engaging community members, agencies would be able to appropriately scope the AI deployment and really align the tools and kind of the outcomes with the communities that they're going to be in, as well as serving, right? Because these tools are it's not just what we're using, it's also what we're building. And also thinking about equity implications. There's more articles starting to come out about this, right? Data centers tend to be built in historically marginalized or underrepresented communities and low-income areas, and that's, that can exacerbate harms. And we can see that again, like think about noise pollution, and then you think about people who are already vulnerable. We want to make sure that we're thinking about that as we plan. So I think that's some of our biggest takeaways. We can go to the next slide. For our particular context, because we understand that the United States is different in terms of how we are able to move and how we're able to operate and how we think about these things, was that local governments can take action. Really, we do have some ability to do so. The importance is really around having challenging conversations and finding a middle ground. And I think we'll touch on this a little bit more as we work, as we discuss this, because difficult conversations often result in positives, at least in my opinion. We also really see that there is such an importance around building community trust, right? We're not just deciding for people what they need. It's really, we want to make sure that we're including them where possible. We really want to continue to encourage partnerships with academia, government, and within government. One of the things, at least for me, and I don't work in San Jose, but one of the biggest things for me was being able to connect with other governments and find out how they're approaching these things, right? Because it's a huge country and we tend to learn from one another. And then, the regulatory environment in the US is quite different from other countries, right? The federal sets the floor, and then we have state, local, and then we kind of, it's quite complex. So we do understand that we have to consider that when having conversations, both with vendors and also with community members, and also inter-agency wise, right? And so that kind of concludes our slideshow. And thank you so much for giving us time and space. And yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Eleonor, Leila, for sharing those fascinating work you're leading on AI and environment. Not only also to see how to better understand the impact of data centers and AI, but also how you can leverage, you presented, you shared several mechanisms for local governments. And maybe we can go a bit deeper, if you agree, on several of the elements you shared. So we can really understand that one of the key elements is about transparency. It's about having figures, numbers on water, energy usage. You mentioned the possibility to leverage procurement for transparency as a kind of powerful tool. Could you maybe share some existing use case, or with when you, Leila, or maybe Eleonor, you managed to use procurement, to get this transparency, and how, in a sense, it's changed your approach to sustainable AI? At the end, how the vendor managed to integrate those principles into its solution?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. And then Eleanor, feel free to jump in if there's anything you want to add. I mentioned that, one of the, I guess, motivating reasons for the coalition in the first place was this issue around transparency and accountability from vendors during the procurement process. And so just speaking from our own experience in San Jose, one of the kind of key examples that we like to give is a couple years ago, we were working with a vendor, a household tech company, you can insert name here, who was providing us a translation tool that we used for 311 services. I'm not sure if it's something that exists outside of the US commonly, or it might be called something else, but it's you call 911 for emergency services and 311 for non-emergency services. Things like if there's a street light that's not working or there's trash in the middle of the road. And so to make those services more accessible, we were using a translation tool to provide that service to diverse set of residents in San Jose. And as we were working with this vendor to kind of do an audit of this tool that they were selling us, we asked them to provide us with performance metrics. For translation, we were using blue metrics, such as one type of metric you can use, because we wanted to know how this was performing across different languages, across different modes, right? Like speech to text, text to text. And we were met with radio silence when we were asking the vendor this information. We were talking, I think, with a sales rep who was many levels removed from anyone who could actually answer our question. And we tried to get that information, no luck. We were able to go into the system ourselves and kind of test it out and get those metrics on our own. But really, the burden should not be on us as the customers to find that information. It should be the vendors providing that to us. And so that was a really key experience that contributed to the impetus of the coalition. Since we've banded together with hundreds of other agencies who now also use the fact sheet in their procurement process, we have seen a shift where when we ask vendors now to give us this information, they'll give it to us. And they'll be asking us how they can get more involved with the coalition. And so I don't want to speak too strongly, but I think there has been a meaningful shift that is correlated with some of the coalition coming together. I'll pause there, Eleanor, in case there's anything you want to add. But Hubert, I know you mentioned also like there was interest maybe in discussing some of the barriers to doing transparency successfully in procurement, which I'm happy to touch on. But Eleanor, I'll let you jump in if there's anything you want to add.
No, I mean, I don't have much. I think I would say thank you for doing that because I know that was I remember that happening because we've also worked in
Yeah.
privacy together for a while, so this was a conversation. But I think I would only add that we have also seen vendors want to improve their products, and I think something just to mention is the environmental impact and sustainability might not be at the forefront of everybody's mind as vendors, right? And that's partly due to many reasons in the US. And so I think that now it's becoming more common to have these conversations. And it is, I've seen it. I've seen folks also say, hey, thank you for making us think about this, because it's our kids, our families also that are affected. So I would add that in terms of the human element, the effects of product improvement as well. Anyway, continue, Leila.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just to like tie it back, I guess, to the environmental impacts around, transparency in the procurement process. We've seen success when we ask for general information about AI systems. I do see potential barriers to, going that next step and getting this info around environmental impacts. I mentioned that we recently updated the AI fact sheet. We have some agencies, including San Jose, who are now starting to use it with that new section around like energy and water consumption. So time will tell like what kind of information we start to get from vendors, whether or not it's meaningful. But I think like an important barrier to call out is that a lot of vendors, since it's relatively early in the industry that we're starting to do this, they might not know what their impacts are with respect to environmental, energy and water usage. They might not know how to even quantify it. And so we did try to include some references on that sheet that can help them, like some, authoritative guides on how to actually think about it, where to get your numbers from. But I think that's going to be sort of just like an industry-wide movement that I know is happening right now with important projects like the AI energy score, really thinking through like systematically how we are going to quantify and compare these impacts across products and across sectors within the industry.
That was indeed a question I wanted to ask you, like on the opacity of AI models, energy consumption. This is, for example, something Sasha Lucioni, that you might know at Hugging Face, is really standing for, regularly asking like for more transparency, creating model to be as close as possible to the exact estimation. Do you believe that you local governments, you also have a role to play in asking local like transparency on those topics?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've never had the pleasure of meeting Sasha, but I follow her work, and she's a leader in this field. We're big fans. I think that local governments, we can be, I guess there's two roles we can play. One, I could see us as being sort of salespeople, maybe, or promoting that kind of AI energy score model, where we ask companies to use that kind of a framework or a set of frameworks to give us that information during the procurement process or when we do, for example, annual audits to make sure that the system is continuing to be effective. But a second role that I think we play is just we are consumers of that kind of framework that academics are working really hard to develop right now, because folks in government, we aren't the ones who are going to be developing that, but it is really going to help us understand and digest the information that we're getting from vendors and actually compare it in a meaningful way and help us make decisions about whether or not to ultimately buy and use a system based on a set of information, including that system's environmental impacts.
Thanks, Leila. Eleonor, did you want to? You also mentioned the importance of having conversation with all stakeholders. And I think it's especially important because when we are talking about data centers installation, we can have in mind, I will be very simplistic, but kind of opposition between citizens that might not want such installation, at least at the beginning, because they might see some counter like that counterback you presented on health, on energy, on water usage, and maybe other stakeholders that want it for economic revenue or technological development. So could you maybe elaborate on this and explain in a sense how such deliberation can happen and can create bridges between two positions that seems opposite, very opposite at the beginning?
Do you want to jump in here, Eleanor? I know that you are passionate about the public engagement aspect.
I think I will start, and then you can definitely, I would love your input too. I think I would start with just saying something very obvious, which is in some areas, it might seem as though an antagonistic conversation in the first place to even say, tell me about your impacts. I really want to name that because I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers. And sometimes we might see conversations that are, well, you're trying to stop innovation. You're trying to, negate the benefit of the technology. And I think that it's very important just to lay that baseline, that it's not even about that. It's about being able to create a space in which folks can come and they can say, hey, and I know that maybe that's such an obvious thing, but for me, at least, I'm very fortunate to live in a city where we have a lot of very vocal public engagement. People care. I think it's really important to start with that baseline. I think additionally, it's going to depend very much on the access that governments and agencies have to academia, to community members, the trust that they have, and the mechanisms by which they can share this information. I think so. So the other one would be the how, right? The trust. I think additionally, they would need to consider, and I'm just speaking generally, there will be different state and local approaches to how they think about sustainability, how they think about budget, how they think about having these conversations, and how much input folks can have. And one of the things that continually comes up is not having performative community engagement, but having meaningful engagement, meaning if people come and they say, hey, we don't want this here, maybe the answer is to have a conversation about limitations of what can and cannot be controlled by governments, or where the expertise is going to be integrated into the approach. I think that that's probably the high level of what I would think, at least from a community engagement perspective. We also really want to highlight that it's important for people to be able to trust in the systems in which they're engaging with. I know for me, I constantly go back to libraries because I feel as though, and that sounds so silly, but I feel as though libraries are great mechanisms by which not only to hold these engagement spaces, but also create literacy. A lot of people can't really say what they can, but they might not feel empowered to actually express what their preferences are, what their beliefs are, what their thoughts are on technology without actually having basic literacy around it, right? And so one of the biggest mechanisms by which we can get meaningful community engagement is by supporting literacy programs. What is it? What is AI? What is the data? Like, these are basics that maybe seem obvious to a lot of people, but really, I think, are helpful in how we have meaningful conversations. Go ahead, Leila.
I don't have anything to add, but I agree with everything you just shared, and I would emphasize the point you made at the beginning, which is that I think bringing up this issue, raising these kinds of concerns, absolutely can feel antagonistic to many people who are in this industry, who care about this space. But I think just to underscore that, what we are trying to do here is not to hinder innovation at all. Actually, without the kind of sustainability that we are arguing is necessary, innovation is going to suffer down the line because our systems are going to collapse. Like electricity and energy is a recent article I was reading reported like the primary bottleneck for continuing to innovate around AI. And so I don't think we should be thinking about innovation and sustainability as mutually exclusive. I think that one actually really requires the other. And so I think the more that we can get folks on board with that kind of framing, the more constructive conversations we can have, and hopefully work together to forge paths ahead.
And that's also very interesting because you're sharing that it's not only about creating space of discussion, but also to educate, as you and Eleonor was saying, like creating literacy, capacity building to the public. Like they have to debate, but they also have to, we also have to provide, in a sense, a space of capacity building for those people. You mentioned in a sense the fact that the system might collapse if we still use so many Gen AI. And I remember in one of your article, I think you're citing a scholar talking about algae bloom. So maybe could you explain? I think it's a very powerful image, this idea of algae bloom. What does it mean, and what can we do to not have Gen AI algae bloom in local governments?
Yeah, this is a deep quote that you're pulling, Hubert, from our article. You're a dedicated reader. So we were really fortunate to get to interview a number of esteemed experts for writing this blog series. And I think the quote that you're referring to is from Irina Reiku, who is a professor, an applied ethics professor at Santa Clara University. I recommend you all follow her work. She's amazing. If I remember correctly, I think in her quote, she was saying that AI is kind of entering all these data centers now as an algae bloom, because of the rapid expanse and the use of Gen AI. We have a lot of existing data centers, right? Like not talking about AI data centers. We have existing data centers that are responsible for the computing that's required for all the things that we do online, right? Like sending emails, participating in e-commerce. Because of the rapid expansion of AI now, um, that AI need for computing is entering these traditional data centers that already exist and could be, I guess, like throttling or inhibiting our ability to participate or enjoy, those traditional digital activities that we usually do because of this increase in demand of compute from AI. And so I think that's what Irina was referring to. And I think one thing that we can do right now that faces limited barriers to actually implementing is what we were just talking about, which is continuing to raise awareness of the issue. It sounds really basic, but I think right now we are at that stage of the conversation where raising awareness and increasing education is really, really important, especially among those with decision-making power. Because I think there are a lot of leaders in government who, they really care about sustainability and could be great champions on this issue, making sure that innovation continues in a sustainable manner. But those leaders might not be aware of this yet, right? And so we need to do our part to educate our peers and those within our organizations and continue to raise awareness. That being said, though, it's not just those leaders; it's everyone who's using Gen AI, in my opinion, at least, right? Folks should be knowing that they shouldn't be wasteful, I guess you could say, right, with their use of ChatGPT or things like Gemini, because it has a real world material impact, um, perhaps even in their local community, right? Like given all the local impacts that we were just talking about it. So yeah, I think that's one way that we can start to kind of address that algae bloom, but it is certainly a systemic issue that will require, I think, multiple interventions.
The only other thing I might add to that is right size scoping of the technology. I think this is very, again, obvious, but it is what we saw with what we've seen in iterations of things that have just been released, whether it's, social media or just access to anything, or even like technology itself. Having right size scoping seems to be a very, very helpful mechanism and an approach to say, is this the solution that we're actually looking for? What is this giving us? And as government, we have a responsibility to provide our residents with meaningful and also reliable services, right? And so how might this actually be or not be useful? I have also seen, after having all these conversations, I've also seen people make the choice to say, oh, I actually don't think that this is the appropriate solution based on this equation, if you will, of environment, actual usefulness, and what the solution, like what we're actually trying to attempt. And so I have seen success with that, where people actually have applied all of these different concepts and have made the decision not to use it or to use it. So that's been really empowering to see. And I just would add, the scoping is so critical. I think Emma Struble said that, right? She said, or they said that, like, we don't want to build, if we're integrating these things into infrastructure, that's great. We want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that is really thoughtful, and we're not getting locked into things that we might not be able to support down the line, right? If we're thinking about water systems, the grid, and this and that. Go ahead, Uber.
No, I think no, that's super interesting, and I was wondering, how do we achieve this? Because indeed, we see with the rise of Gen AI, more and more stakeholders wanted to do Gen AI for doing Gen AI. So, is it like awareness? Is it individual knowledge? Is it some process? Like, how do you manage to get this kind of technological wisdom, where at the end you're using the right technology for the right problem?
It's a great question. I think that it's all the things that you mentioned. It's not just going to be, any one thing that's really going to kind of get us to where we need to get here. We are in a moment where for the past couple years, we'll see how long it continues, but there has been, a huge hype cycle around AI, around Gen AI. I think some of it is warranted because some of the things that it's doing is truly transformative, right? It's changing the way that people work. It's introduced a totally new kind of tool to everyday life for people. But at the same time, I think, like Eleanor was saying, there are certain uses that it's well suited for, and others that it's not appropriate maybe to use it for. And so I think, as much as we can kind of cut through that hype, get folks, like Eleanor said, to kind of right size the scope of their use. Um, that's how we're going to get there. And part of that, I think, is just continuing to have these conversations like the one that you're hosting right now, Hubert, to really kind of shift the culture and the timbre of the conversation that's happening right now. But I think it's going to be a multi-pronged approach that's going to be necessary. But I'm hopeful because in these early conversations that we've already been having, once people learn about this, they are changing their behavior and they are changing their use. So I think we just got to keep pushing.
Thanks, Leila. I'm echoing a conversation that happened actually in the chat in parallel between Xiaofan and Peter on basically how to better integrate data centers into the urban fabric, into cities, when they are moving and it's happening more and more. How do we better connect those infrastructures with other infrastructures, with other urban systems? Is it something you're aware of, maybe already working on with the city of San Jose and the city of Seattle? And things you want to share here?
I can get started real quick. It's the question is starting to get me a little bit out of my depth, but I think that there's still maybe some helpful anecdote that I can share because I think this is a really important question. Absolutely, we should be thinking about purposeful design as we start to not start. I mean, the data centers are already being built rapidly in rural, suburban, and urban cores, right? And so making sure that when we do build them and where we locate them is done so in a purposeful way. Um, and so I can just share a quick anecdote. I was speaking to another colleague in government recently who shared that a data center in the past couple of years, it was built in that city's downtown core in the middle of like a block that was previously very lively, very bustling, lots of people around, lots of activity. I think the data center, it might have replaced like some kind of restaurant or cafe or some kind of like third space. But once the data center was there, because there was no, I guess, like commercial activity involved or human activity, because it's just the servers in the room. Not many people come in or out. Um, it that data center kind of bisected this block that used to be a very bustling street in the heart of like a downtown core, and it actually sort of negatively impacted the atmosphere for that part of downtown. And so they're thinking of now, in that city, like, should they renew that lease for the data center? Maybe they can place it somewhere else because it's having this sort of, unintended impact with regards to the economic activity. So that's just anecdotal, but it made sense to me when I heard it, and I think it goes to your question that like absolutely we should be thoughtful in our planning and our design and do our best to put the data centers in places that don't disrupt, but maybe even enhance urban life. Eleanor, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
No, I think just time. I think time is going to, particularly again in our context of the US, I think this is we will see with time how folks, because really it's going to come down to residents and city planners and experts, I think, in terms of also partnering with academics and having these visions for what we want to see. But I do think time will tell. I know that that's a terrible response, but
Yeah, no, it will bring maturity on this topic and more experience, and makes total sense. Maybe a last question before we end this conversation. Any message you would like to share with other local governments that are in this journey that also want to have an impact on the environmental footprint of AI? What would you recommend as a first step, or what would you like to share with other local governments?
Yeah, thanks for this question, by the way. It's a great time for us to kind of replug our blog series. I think if local governments, folks who work in local governments are just starting to get oriented to this issue and want to start thinking about what they can do within their locality, that is why we wrote the blog series. I think it's a great starting point. It's not the end point though, because there's so many other great resources out there, really a growing body of resources from academics, from industry experts, that can really take local governments to the next stage in terms of addressing this issue. All the experts that we spoke to, they're referenced in the articles. I would recommend folks to follow their work too, because they're frequently continuing to have new findings in this field and kind of change the way we're thinking about things. And then I guess one other thing I would say is if agencies care about this issue and want to connect with other like-minded agencies trying to make innovation more sustainable, the coalition, the GovAI Coalition, is a great place to get involved because it really is a community of practice, and we're seeing a lot of our membership is thinking about this issue already. And so I could see in the near future we might have some kind of working group to really carve out space to think about this a little more intensely with each other. And so if that interests you at all, I definitely recommend joining the coalition. And I can share a link to do that in the chat right now. But Eleanor, I'll pass to you in case there's anything that you want to add.
I think I suppose that for us in our context of just moving, all of us moving in a direction, I think maybe what I try to always remember is to try to be collaborative and not make an assumption that what exists in one area or geographical, area is going to be the same in another one. I know that as an EU citizen, when I go to Europe, I have certain expectations. I know what's going on. I have an understanding around the values and principles that we are committed to. I also know as a US citizen, I also have a very different experience. And so sometimes the conversations, it's really helpful for us to be able to look to each other and have some conversations with curiosity, right? Like why sometimes asking some very basic and maybe seemingly silly questions might lead us to be able to develop solutions in a way that is really I guess, yeah, I would say not antagonistic. I think that that's a big word for me because it's something that I've seen a lot of, and sometimes I'm just like, why? But then I try to have to contextualize why. So that's for me the biggest takeaway with all of this is to just remember to feel comfortable to reach out and partner, because really we're all in this together. Like this is not, it sounds woo-woo, but that is how I feel about it. So
Yeah, impact and achievement through collaboration. And this is definitely the DNA of the GovAI Coalition. I shared indeed the link in the chat. This is really like a beautiful initiative. A few days ago, I was in a panel with Emily Royal, and she was, also standing and sharing this message of building coalition, like connecting with each other. So what you're sharing, I think it's a beautiful message and a beautiful conclusion for this Urban AI conversation. Really thanks a lot, Leila, Eleonor, for taking the time to join, to also present and answer all the questions, such at an early time, especially. It was a great pleasure of welcoming you. Next Urban AI conversation, it will be next week, actually, same time on Wednesday, with the city of Bogota, that is using AI on cultural policy to make culture accessible and inclusive to all their citizens. You will see it's really a fascinating topic and initiative. Thanks again, Leila, Eleonor. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you so much. It was
Coming.
great to chat with you, Bert. Bye,
Take care.
everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.